From the north side of the San Francisco Bay to Singapore, welcome to Urban X Real Talk Fitness Radio with your host, business owner, lecturer, author, master trainer, Tiaja. With over 30 years of experience in the health and fitness industry, he will challenge the fitness between your ears. So prepare your mind, body, and soul for the revolution of self-care, the evolution of fit, with real talk about real people, real health, real fitness, and the real deal behind our present illness culture. Real talk every time, all the time. Get weekly insights on how to shift your thinking, emoting, eating, training, hydrating, goal setting, and resting for you, the everyday athlete. You can cheat your fitness, but you can't steal your health flow. It's Tuesday, 9 a.m. Let's flow.
And now 10 seconds remain in what could be a heartbreaking loss for the Vikings and a thrilling come-from-behind win for the Saints. Winner goes to Philly.
Only 10 seconds left. You have to get out of bounds. There's no way you can get the ball spiked.
10 seconds to go. 24-23 Saints. Vikings at their own 39. It's third down. Three receivers right, Thielen left. Marshawn Lattimore 12 yards from Adam. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.
I want a miracle to happen right now. I need a miracle. Case Keenum, give me a miracle!
Caught by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! Oh my God! At the 30. No 10. Touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Stephon Diggs and the Minnesota Vikings have lost off.
Stephon Diggs did it!
Oh my God! I'm getting from Case Keenum. This is the happiest day of my life.
Welcome to Urban X Real Talk Fitness Radio, where we challenge the fitness between your ears. I'm your host, Tiaja, and today on episode 46, part 12 of our series titled The War on Health, Choice, and Common Sense, I'm going to backtrack just a bit here. Nearly a decade ago, MIT professor and founder of cognitive science, Noam Chomsky, exposed 10 media manipulation strategies of the population. These techniques, he said, are not only used to manipulate opinion, but to manufacture consent. Now, another word for consent is compliance, but the word I like even more is permission. When you give someone permission to control your emotions, then you are no longer driving the bus. You are being thrown underneath this crushing weight. Chomsky goes on to say that our system of education is a system of imposed ignorance, quote unquote. In fact, it can be argued that our current system of education is no more than a propaganda and cultural initiation machine whose sole purpose is to produce compliant, non-thinking citizens, as well as a trained labor force. Now allow me to quickly run down Professor Chomsky's 10 media manipulation strategies so I can deal with each individually in upcoming episodes. Strategy number 1. The strategy of distraction. Strategy number 2. Create problems, then offer solutions. Number 3. The gradual strategy. Number 4. The strategy of deferring. 5, go to the public as a little child. Number 6, use the emotional side. Number 7, keep the public in ignorance. Number 8, encourage mediocrity and complacency. Number 9, self-blame. And number 10, know the individuals better than they know themselves. Now trust me when I say that it is so tempting to delve into each one right now, but for the sake of brevity, I'll only discuss one at a time, starting with the powerful and often used strategy of distraction. 2018 will be just another year unless today you decide that it won't be. It is Tuesday, June 19th, 2018. Let's flow.
Now, these are big issues. Some Americans know about it, some don't. But one argument that's being made is that reality television, movies, TV shows, all of that is keeping us very, very distracted from things that we should be fighting against. One thing that people are upset about is the NFL and how it's considered an opiate of the masses. Let's listen to Alex Jones make the argument. And yes, I know Alex Jones isn't the most credible person to make some arguments, but he might have a point here. Take a look.
Cancel the Super Bowl or America dies. Our Bill of Rights and Constitution is being dismantled. And sports is the new God. It's seen as what is good and wholesome and pure. Don't get me wrong. Little League football, soccer, jogging in a marathon, that's great if you are involved in it or your family is. But it's very, very sick that people get depressed if their team loses or get euphoric, like they've won the lottery when their team wins. This is scientifically crafted mental illness. If you go back to the time of Rome, at the peak of their empire 2,000 years ago, Cicero and others, historians at the time, wrote about how as the empire got more and more corrupt, it consciously funded more arenas, more sports stadiums, more gladiatorial events, more horse races, because as long as the people had a spectacle to invest their psychological worth in future in, they didn't mind if they were becoming poorer or being overtaxed or being enslaved. People dress up in war paint and they get all serious and they go down and yell and scream for their team. Meanwhile, they don't know the three branches of government. They don't know what their state capital is. They're not involved in politics.
About 100 years ago, this big organization with many branches, they wanted to rule the world basically using Britain as a nucleus of a system, an embryo, which also was going to be joined with the US under the Anglo-American establishment, wrote about the kind of culture and the changes of culture over a 100-year period that they would actually design, implement and bring in. And H.G. Wells talked about it too. He talked about arenas. He says arenas could be put up across the world for sports, for instance. Now at that time, sports was something that children, school children were into. Adults became adults and got onto adult things. So it was unimaginable at the time that people could actually believe that there was even a need for adult sports and entertainment, never mind having arenas built across the world. But he said we can do this and foist basically a sports culture for the males. Using a tribal system, we're all tribal to an extent. That's why we even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood. That's why we're supplied with these leaders. And because the average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny as the expert class arose, it was decided that the males would get their outlet basically, gradually becoming helpless as males through sports. Therefore they'd have a tribal team they could identify with, they could cheer them on as though they were winning. In their own personal lives, they were getting nowhere. They were getting disenfranchised in a sense as experts took over decision-making for them in all kinds of fields. So this was psychology at use, planned before they even implemented the sports. When radio came along, of course, they used that to the maximum. Sports for the men, soaps basically for the women. And then in came television. as I say, with its alpha state, its hypnotic state. And sure enough, around the 1960s, really, 50s and 60s, it took off. It really, really took off. And men became glued on Saturday nights to the sports shows. A culture industry, which is called by its own the culture industry. The Soviet Union had a department called the culture industry. Their actors and directors were called the cultural leaders, because they would, like a computer, people are like computers, all you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation or a block of nations who are all getting the same upgrades at the same time along certain paths. Today we call it political correctness. Most people want to belong to their peer group. They want to be the same as everyone else when it comes to opinions. In fact, they judge their own personal sanity by bouncing ideas off their neighbors and friends who will answer back and agree on these same topics in kind. It doesn't matter if the topics or what you're given are facts or utter nonsense, as long as everyone agrees at the same time. You'll say, well, I'm sane, and your friends will all agree because they've had the same information given to them.
But they've been programmed, and I'm sad because I know that it's hard for people like that to take an interest, a serious interest in world affairs, to take a serious interest in what their elected officials are doing. And they're not going to be really inclined to study or discover the deception that's being used against them. And so I'm sad because I see all of that in a flash in my mind as being an indication of how easy it is for the masses
In America, there are 1,000,001 ways for you to distract yourself. The more obvious ones are television and social media, as 25% of the average person's day is consumed by their addiction with either their small or large screen. But for men in particular, there is arguably no greater distraction than sports. Sports has not only been elevated to the level of a demigod in our culture, meaning it is tantamount to idol worship, but for most men, it is also an extension of who they believe they are. After all, men readily identify themselves by what they do as opposed to who they are. It is also how they compete and bond with other men. If your father is a Cowboys fan, chances are you will bleed blue and white too. In that regard, sports is generational. In fact, it may be the only legacy a man leaves to his son or daughter. Sports are so magnanimous and pervasive in our lives that nearly every restaurant now has to have several big screens broadcasting various sporting events simultaneously, or chants falling behind the competition. Even gas stations now have sports updates while you're pumping gas. Of course, if you have ESPN or any one of the other various sports apps on your mobile device, you can get up-to-the-minute scores and updates of your favorite teams or players. Now, I grew up liking the Raiders and Lakers because my older brothers were Laker and Raider fans. The Raiders came naturally since we grew up in Oakland, but I'm still not sure how the Lakers snuck in there. Though who didn't like the Showtime Lakers of the 80s and 90s? Well, Celtics fans notwithstanding. But the Showtime Lakers came much later in my life, so how did the love of the purple and gold get there? See, that's what I'm talking about. Being from the Bay, I was also a Warriors fan, still I liked the Lakers more. What's really fascinating and really interesting to me is, as a Raider fan, you learn to hate the guys across the Bay. Today, ask any Raider fan and they will tell you without blinking how and why they hate the 49ers and vice versa. Giants fans hate the A's, and A's fans hate the Giants, and Giants fans hate the Dodgers, and 49er fans hate the Rams and Seahawks. But wait a minute, where did all this hatred come from? See, there really is no rational explanation other than the fact that your love or hatred for whatever sports team or player, for that matter, has been manufactured and passed down from generation to generation. Now, here's my 2 cents, and feel free to keep the change. It is laughable to me when I hear the younger generation claiming how independent and different they are than their parents. If it's that hard to separate your love for a sports team from that of your parent, how much harder do you think it would be to separate your opinion about politics or religion or race? Sure, it can be done, There are people who will themselves to like a team because they're prisoners of the moment, or they now live in the city where the winning team resides, and now for the sake of belonging to the tribe, if you will, they become a fan of that team. Look, I know men who literally love LeBron James more than they love their wives and children. In fact, in their eyes, LeBron can do no wrong. Of course, there are just as many men that hate him. Now think about that. I'm talking about two of the most powerful emotions human beings possess, giving over frivolously to someone who will likely never know you exist. If I can get you to become addicted to sports, I can get you to defer your undivided attention and perhaps sanity for several hours, or in the case of the NBA playoffs, several weeks. And with all the ugliness and blight and pain in the world, I can suspend your hope while encouraging faith in an outcome that will have no real consequence in your life or the lives of those whom you pledge your love, but not the same allegiance to. Dear friends, I wish above all things that you be in health and that you prosper just as your soul prospers. You've been listening to Urban X Real Talk Fitness Radio with your host, Tiaja. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast by downloading our app at tiajae.podbean.com. And while you're at it, I strongly encourage you to check out our website at www.urbanxfitness.net. There you will find all of our completely natural body sculpting nutritional products, our sportswear, as well as our downloadable workout books with embedded how-to videos for home and gym, as well as our 4.5 popular menus available through our online stores, the Urban Experience Fit Stores 1 and 2. Now, last thing, please pass on this unique gift of health by sharing our podcast with friends, family, and coworkers. And until next week, as always, walk in health and peace.